slowly but surely, we are working our way through all of the factions in the game. Yesterday, we covered the Anarchy faction. The day before that, we covered Energy. And today, we're going to cover Tyranny. We don't have any tokens to go over like some of the other factions in the game, so that's fantastic. We can get straight into the cards. I do want to mention, though, some extra energy cards have been discovered since I last made my video on energy, so I'm probably going to do a smaller video where I cover all of the cards that I missed, but I'll leave that until after we've covered all of the other factions. All right, let's jump straight into it, starting with the leaders again, as always, going in order of defense value. Let's start off with Lex Luthor with 19 defense. He's got a 4-cost effect, and he reads KO a recruit. If that recruit was a friendly recruit, sacrifice them to draw 2 cards and charge Lex Luthor twice. So he's got a 4-cost ability that just reads destroy an enemy recruit, so that's awesome, but you can also use that to target a friendly recruit, get back 2 that you paid for it, so you kind of are only paying 2 charge for this, and if you do that, you also get to draw 2 cards. Now, obviously, I've seen the full card list here. I can tell you that there are a couple good targets, things that you want to destroy, but honestly, not as many as you would expect. So you are going to genuinely be in situations where you have to quote-unquote sacrifice something in order to get this off. There are some cards in other factions that are going to be beneficial to KO as well, so there's definitely some synergy with like quote-unquote self-destruction, but there isn't as much as I imagined, and there's probably not as much as you're probably imagining either. With that said, I still think Lex Luthor's a fantastic card. Even just the ability to KO an enemy on will whenever you want to is pretty good. So yes, I like Lex Luthor a lot, and I don't even think you need to like build the deck around him. I think his effect is just fine. You can even just throw him in aggro decks where you're going to have a lot of cards on board, and you'd be like, okay, I don't really need this 2/1 anymore that I played on turn 1. I'd rather draw 2 cards right now, so let's go ahead and activate that. Plus, it makes some space on your board for you to play another card. So yeah, Lex Luthor's great in both a kind of control-y strategy that needs to do self-destruction effects, but I think he's also great in more aggressive strategies where you don't really care too much about the individual card on your board. Next up is Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy is an interesting one. She's got 20 defense, and she's got a 2-cost ability that reads Summon a Savage Vines. What is a Savage Vines? Well, it's a super interesting card. It's a bronze card, but it doesn't really matter because we're summoning it with this effect anyway, and you can't add this card to your deck. It's a token, so there's no way to put this in your list of 40 cards. But it's a 3/2, so it's got good stats, especially for a card that you're getting for free. You're not really paying for this card. I mean, you're paying with charge, but that's it. And then its effect is pretty awesome too. It reads, after you draw a card, enemy leaders lose 1 defense. This is such a cool effect because it's a passive damage that's happening over the course of the game. This is probably going to go in certain control archetypes. We're going to go over tactics probably tomorrow. And that faction has access to a ton of cards that reads draw a card. There's even some cards in Tyranny that we're going to go over here that read draw a card. So there is some built-in synergy with Poison Ivy, but worst case scenario, she can just summon 3/2s on will, which is already pretty good. And best case scenario, she contributes to either a control strategy or some type of combo strategy that passively deals damage over the course of the game, and I think that's quite effective. Poison Ivy is a card that I'm looking forward to, and I know a lot of people are looking forward to playing with Poison Ivy. The final Tyranny leader that we're going to go over today is Black Adam. He's a 22 defense leader, so very close to being one of the most defensive leaders in the game, and his effect reads, after you deploy a recruit with 5 or more attack, charge Black Adam. So he gets 1 charge every time you play something with 5 or more attack, but he's got a very costly effect. It is a 10-cost effect that reads, Black Adam gets plus 10 attack. Whoa, that's a lot of attack. Yes, you can use this to KO enemies. It can also be used as a removal tool. I found myself through testing on Tabletop Simulator that I've been using this more as a removal tool than a finisher tool. And for that reason, it does feel a little bit weaker than I was expecting, honestly. That's not to say Black Adam's a bad card, but he definitely comes with a bigger deck building restriction than the other leaders. You can't just put Black Adam into any list. You do have to kind of work around the fact that his effect is so expensive, and you have to put specific types of cards in your deck to help contribute to that strategy. All right, now we can jump into the cards, starting off with Brainiac Drone. This is a free card, so this does not cost any resources to play, and it's a 0/1. You might think to yourself, well, this is kind of an awkward stat line. Don't worry, all will be clear in just a moment. Here's the keyword Parting Shot. Draw a card. Parting Shot just means once this card is destroyed. Now, thankfully, there's a lot of ways you can do self-destruction effects in DC Dual Force. There's not only just the Lex Luthor effect, which obviously destroys a card for you, and then if you use Lex Luthor's effect on Brainiac Drone, you're effectively drawing 3 cards, but also you can just put Brainiac Drone in front of your leader, and your opponent's going to have to deal with it at some point, or else it's just this immovable wall that is protecting your leader forever. They can't hit your leader until they get rid of Brainiac Drone, so you're going to at least waste one of their attacks and draw a card, and you didn't pay anything for this. So honestly, I'm pretty high on Brainiac Drone. I think it's a really good card, not only in strategies where it needs to blow itself up, but I think it's just also a good card in general. Moving on to bronze cards now, let's start off with Bane's Venom. Bane's Venom reads, give a friendly recruit +4/+4 and start sacrifice this. So whatever you give this to is going to destroy itself, but it gets +4/+4. Perhaps a good combo card with Brainiac's Drone, as we just went over Brainiac's Drone. But there's also going to be other cards you probably want to pair this with. I don't see a crazy number of cards that I specifically want to pair this with, but it is a strong effect. And every time you see a card that doesn't really mind the fact that it's getting destroyed, like for example with Brainiac Drone, Bane's Venom is going to be a card that you have to keep in mind. So I think the longer the game exists, the more cards we get in the game, the better off Bane's Venom will be. Forgive me, I'm adding this in post because I wanted to add one quick thing about Bane's Venom. It's very good for this card that it reads start and not end of turn. The reason for this is because whatever you buff with Bane's Venom, if it's currently acting as a blocker to protect something else, either your leader or a recruit you've put on the back row, your card that you've ultimately sacrificed in the end acts as a blocker for an additional turn rotation. Not only does it still act as a blocker for additional turn rotation, but it also still has those additional stats that you've given to it from Bane's Venom, so it's an extra annoying thing for the opponent to have to deal with, on top of being a great offensive tool. Next up is Life Absorption. It reads, enemy leaders lose 2 health, and then friendly leaders gain 2 health, well, armor in this case, but you get the point. Yeah, I think this is a fine effect. This is very technically better the more leaders that you have, and there are ways to gain additional leaders. We went over Eclipso yesterday, so if you're building an Eclipso deck, maybe Life Absorption's a little bit better than it otherwise would be, so maybe it's worth considering running Eclipso and Life Absorption in the same deck. Other than that, I don't have too many things to say about Life Absorption. It's not really contributing to your board state at all, which is kind of frustrating, but if you're going for a more burn strategy where you're trying to hurt your opponent slowly over the course of the game, we've seen cards like Poison Ivy that we went over earlier in this video, and we're going to go over a couple more that will kind of deal damage naturally as the game progresses. Life Absorption is going to contribute to that strategy. One last thing about Life Absorption that I'm adding in post again, sorry. The card does not read Restore Health or Heal the same way that other healing cards do. This specifically says Gain 2 Defense. So I wonder if this card specifically lets you go over your whatever your maximum defense value is for that leader, unlike the other healing effects in the game. If that's the case, it's nice that this can be used at any point during the game. You don't have to wait until you've lost health to get value out of it. You can just play it. That's a pretty big difference maker, I think. Next up is Traumatize. Give an enemy recruit -2/-2. I am very, very, very high on this card. I like this card a lot. You're essentially removing 2 attack from a target permanently. That's really, really good. Obviously, you can't do it to the enemy leader, but you can do it to recruits. That's going to completely shut down a lot of cards, and that's why I'm super high on Traumatize. I like it a lot. Nefarious Scheme is up next, and it just reads your opponent discards a random action. There's a little bit of targeting in here, which is interesting. It hits only actions, so if your opponent has a full hand of recruits, they're not going to discard anything, but if they're holding on to a specific action that they need for a specific situation, they're going to lose out on it when you play this card. Honestly, I'm not super high on this card. I don't expect it to be very good, because again, it is that kind of situational thing. There's no way of you knowing if your opponent has an action in their hand or not. Obviously, it's going to be really good in certain matchups. That's going to come down to a meta question, one that we can't answer yet because we don't know what the meta of this game is going to look like just yet. Moving on to Ivy's Flytrap. Ivy's Flytrap is a 0/6, so that's a lot of defensive stats, and it reads start. If you have a Poison Ivy leader, draw a card. So you can see how this ultimately contributes to the Poison Ivy game plan. I will mention, even though I do think that if you're running Ivy's Flytrap, you're probably running Poison Ivy, but you don't necessarily have to. A 0/6 might just be okay. Again, it's going to depend on your deck and your current strategy, and it's certainly not something you can just throw into any deck, but Ivy's Flytrap does have use cases outside of Poison Ivy. Probably not in like a constructed format, because there's probably always going to be better options for you, but it's worth keeping in mind that a 0/6 is no joke for stats. Up next is Talon. This is a card I'm super high on, man. This card is sick. Talon is a 1/2 with lethal. Any bronze card with lethal is worth considering, plus it has 2 defense, so it's not going to die to any ping damage. They need to be able to do at least 2 damage to this thing, and there's a massive difference between 1 and 2 damage. Talon's a great card. I'll be putting him in almost every Anarchy deck I have. Next up is Brick, who's a 1/4, and he reads, if non-attack damage would be dealt to Brick, prevent it, and he gets +1 instead. So if any effects would deal damage to Brick, so non-attacks would deal damage to Brick, he's going to gain some attack instead. I've tried doing some thinking about what type of deck you include Brick in, and honestly, I didn't come up with much. There's maybe some stuff you can do with him in the Energy faction if you want to splash in Energy into your Anarchy deck. That being said, the things I came up with weren't particularly impressive to me. I will mention, though, of course, this is 5 stats just on its own. 1/5 is a good stat line, so if you can find a way to increase Brick's attack value, he gets exponentially better very quickly, I think. Next up is Deimos. Deimos is a 2/2. He reads, deploy, give an enemy recruit -1/-2. -1. I think giving minus stats is really strong, and as a result, I think Deimos is quite good. He definitely won't belong in every deck, but he's certainly a viable card. Next up is Nyssa Al-Ghul. She has Hidden and Parting Shot. Interesting combination of keywords there, because Hidden is a way to protect your cards, and Parting Shot implies we want this card to be destroyed. So kind of a clash of ideas there, but the Parting Shot effect gives your recruits in your hand +1/+1. That's a strong effect. I think this will be best in decks that happen to run a lot of bronze cards. There are a decent number of bronze cards that keep up with a decent number of silver cards, and a couple +1/+1s here or there on your bronze cards will make the difference between them being able to one-shot a silver card, and if your bronze cards are going 1-for-1 with a silver card, then you're absolutely laughing. That's your exact ideal scenario. Up next is Shado. She's a 2/1, and she reads Deploy, give another friendly recruit lethal. This is, again, another card I'm very, very high on. I like this card a lot. There's certain cards you want to combo this with, things that have high defense values. We're going to go over one in this next card, in fact. Let's just move on to the next card right away, and that's Prometheus, who's a 1/5, and you can see just how well he combos with Shado. If you play him and Shado on the same turn, you're developing a lethal card that is 1/5, and it has guard. The opponent absolutely has to deal with this. Really cool combo, and that's far from the most that Shado can do. Shadow's got a lot of cool interactions. This is just like an obvious one to point out, so I thought I would do that. But even outside of the Shado interaction, I think Prometheus is a great card. He's 6 worth of stats, and he's got the guard keyword, and he's a bronze card. Big fan of that. Next up is Black Mask. He's a 2/2 and has an Arkham Inmate synergy. He reads, after you deploy another Arkham Inmate, give your Arkham Inmates +1/+1. Now, it's unclear based on this text, but I'm assuming this is just referring to your Arkham Inmates that are on the board. Because if it was referring to your Arkham Inmates in your deck and in your hand, it would say everywhere. And we've seen examples of that in other DC Dual Force cards. Whenever they're referring to all of your cards everywhere, they say everywhere on the card. Black Mask does not say everywhere, so my assumption is he's just referring to the board. The Mad Hatter is up next, another Arkham Inmate synergy card. He's a 1/1, which is about as weak as it gets, and it reads, after you draw an Arkham Inmate, give them +2/+2. Deploy, each player draws a card. I love the first part of his effect. The deploy, each player draws a card, and the fact that he has pretty low stats dampens my excitement for Mad Hatter quite a bit. It's not to say that it'll be a bad card, but without those two factors, I would be very excited about the card. Those are certainly limiting factors, though, for sure. I noticed while I was editing this video that I wasn't particularly clear about why I did not like the deploy effect on Mad Hatter, so let me explain. In DC Dual Force, you have access to 2 card plays per turn. If I use one of my card plays on Mad Hatter, I need the card draw from Mad Hatter to hit a card that I can play that turn. Ideally, it would be an Arkham Inmate, and if I don't hit a card I can play that turn, or if I use Mad Hatter as my second card for the turn, the opponent's going to get a chance to be proactive with the card that they get from Mad Hatter before I get to be proactive with the card that I get from Mad Hatter. So you kind of give up a little bit of priority there, just because you're hard limited to 2 cards per turn. Now, obviously, it's not that straightforward, because again, if you hit an Arkham Inmate, you're getting more value than they are, and you've obviously built your deck in such a way that you'll be hitting Arkham Inmates relatively frequently. But if you draw an action card that is obviously not an Arkham Inmate, or if you hit one of your non-Arkham Inmate cards, I think you're putting yourself pretty significantly behind, actually. Especially because I think a lot of these Arkham Inmate decks are going to be fighting for board priority or tempo. So yeah, my hopes aren't high for the Mad Hatter, but I hope to be wrong because it's a cool effect. Hugo Strange is a 2/2, and he reads Deploy. An enemy leader loses a charge. This effect is crazy. You slowing down how quickly the opponent is charging is a very impactful effect. It's going to be more damaging in some matchups than it is in others, but it will be good in every matchup. I'm pretty high on Hugo Strange. You can expect to see me running a lot of Hugo Strange whenever I'm running Anarchy, and I think a lot of other people will as well. Next up is the Riddler. This is an ultimate card, so you can only run 1 copy of this card. It is a 2/4, so really, really good stats, and it reads, at the start of your opponent's turn, they seek a card and put it into your hand. So they get to see 1 of 3 cards. These are completely random cards, and they must choose one of them to be added to your hand. So they control the card that you get, but you're getting 1 card every turn completely for free, and it triggers at the start of their turn, which means you don't need to worry about Riddler surviving a turn, but he probably is going to survive a turn and get you 2 card draws because he's got 4 defense. I like Riddler a lot. Next up is Escape Tunnel, and it reads, give Arkham Inmates in your deck hidden, draw a bronze Arkham Inmate from the bottom half of your deck. It is kind of a shame that this is a Tyranny card because you're only going to be running this if you're splashing with Anarchy. Based on what I can tell, there's just not enough Tyranny Arkham Inmates to really justify running an Arkham Inmate deck within the Tyranny faction. So you're going to have to splice into Anarchy to really take advantage of this type of card. And honestly, right now, I'm not sure if that's going to be the optimal route for Anarchy Inmates. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more if we ever do more specific theory crafting videos. But long story short, I don't think Escape the Tunnel is going to incentivize us enough to splash into the Anarchy faction. Up next is Shadow's Blade. Shadow's Blade reads, give a friendly recruit ambush this turn. Ambush is a fantastic keyword. I'm not sure if it's worth the action to give a friendly recruit ambush. You have to use one of your resources, and resources do not come quickly in this game. That being said, ambush is absolutely capable of making some pretty huge tempo swings. So I've definitely got my eye on this card. I just don't know what the surrounding, other 38 cards in the deck are going to be to really get the most value out of this card. Mark of Cain is our first silver card, and it reads, give an enemy recruit -3/-3 and create a magical spell in your hand. Similar to what I said about Traumatize, I'm really big on cards that give minus stats to the opponent. Very, 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 very powerful effect. And it's generating a magical spell on top of that. Magical spells can be quite good. Now, you're not seeking the magical spell, so you're just going to get a random one. You don't get to choose which one you get. You don't have any control over it whatsoever. But it's okay, because I think even without the create a magical spell part, this card would almost be runnable. And then on top of that, it's also giving you a magical spell. So we'll definitely take it. We've got Bursting Boom Tube, which summons in parademons in your empty spaces. So it can summon up to 5 parademons. Most of the time, the best case scenario will be 4 though. And the parademons are all 1/1s, but they have the effect Parting Shot, give your other parademons +1 attack. So there's going to be situations where you jam this, and then on your next turn, you try to run all of your parademons into something to get the most amount of damage possible, get some positive trades for you, but also putting those parademons on board can be useful for self-sacrifice effects like Lex Luthor. So perhaps maybe you just include this in your Lex Luthor lists, though honestly, I'm not sure how great of a synergy that is. I'm not sure how much the +1 attack value is going to matter. Maybe in an ultimate greedy strategy where you're not really playing a lot of cards in the early game and you need to play something like Bursting Boom Tube to help clear up the board, even though that's going to take 2 turns for you to really get the value out of that, it still might end up being worth it, especially if those control strategies end up being viable. But that's a wait and tell meta question that we won't be able to answer in this video. What I will be able to answer in this video is how awesome Bane is. Bane is a 6/4, so pretty low on the defensive side for a silver card, but his effect is absolutely outstanding. It reads, after Bane damages a leader he's attacking, exhaust them and permanently increase their leader ability cost by 2. So if this hits something like Doomsday now has a 6 cost ability. If this hits something like Lex Luthor, he now has a 6 cost ability. Black Adam goes to a 12 cost ability, and if Bane hits them twice, they're basically never using that ability again. Bane's a great card. He's not going to trigger every single time he comes into play, but once he comes into play, it's a threat that the opponent has to deal with. I'm very high on Bane. Whenever you get the chance to include Bane into your deck, as long as it makes sense for your overall cohesive strategy, I think he's going to be an excellent include. Talia Al-Ghul is a 4/4 with the effect Hidden and Parting Shot. Again, that kind of weird dichotomy between Hidden and Parting Shot that we talked about earlier. And that was also on an Al-Ghul, right? We talked about Nyssa Al-Ghul last time we were talking about that. Now we're talking about Talia Al-Ghul. She has Parting Shot, heal 3 damage from your leaders. Earlier on, we talked about the idea of putting Life Absorption in an Eclipso deck. Well, Talia Al-Ghul is perhaps maybe another way of getting some extra value out of healing on leaders, because Talia Al-Ghul is saying that she heals your leaders, not a leader. So the more leaders you have, the more value you get out of Talia Al-Ghul. Will she be a viable card? I'm not sure. It depends how important healing ends up being. 6 healing is certainly no joke. I'd also be a little bit worried about 4 defense. If she was a 4/5, I think I could confidently say that she's just kind of a good card, but 4 might just be a little bit too vulnerable. Speaking of silver cards with low stats, let's talk about Mercy Graves. Mercy Graves is a 2/3 with guard, so she's got low stats and guard, and she reads, deploy, your opponent doesn't generate their weakest resource next turn. This effect is so powerful. You can do some crazy stuff with this. If you can repeat this effect, or if you can play 2 Mercy Graves in the same turn, your opponent just doesn't have resources during their turn. That doesn't necessarily mean they can't do anything. There's definitely interactions and cards and things that they can do on their turn that don't necessarily involve resources, so you're not completely locking them out of the game when you do that, but it's going to be pretty disruptive in a lot of cases. I'm pretty high on Mercy Graves. I just don't know what the other 38 cards in the deck look like. Maybe I'll do some science with Mercy Graves on Tabletop Simulator and I'll report back, but for now I like the card a lot. Speaking of cards that I like, it's Ocean Master. He's a 4/4 and he reads start, so that means at the start of your turn you get to move an enemy recruit. Moving an enemy recruit can be very powerful for aggressive strategies. A lot of times the opponent's going to play a card on their turn in front of their leader to try and protect it, but at the start of your turn you can use Ocean Master to move that card out of the way and then immediately throw all of your damage onto the enemy leader. Fantastic effect. I think people are going to undervalue this card quite a lot at the beginning and then slowly realize just how strong it is in aggressive strategies. Speaking of strong cards in aggressive strategies, it's Lady Shiva. Do we just get like 4 transitions or 4 segues in a row from card to card? That's fantastic. Lady Shiva is a 3/1 with Ambush and Lethal. Ambush and Lethal on the same card is fantastic. Yes, she only has the 1 defense, so she's very vulnerable to pretty much any effect in the game. pretty much anything can kill Lady Shiva. But if she does manage to live, if you've built up a board that's threatening enough where the opponent has to deal with other threats before they deal with Lady Shiva can kill absolutely anything as long as it doesn't have shield or perhaps evade or something like that. Lady Shiva is fantastic at dealing with big threats, and she's fantastic at maintaining board control for those aggressive decks. She's in my favorite deck at the moment through all the testing I've done on Tabletop Simulator. I like her a lot. Gorilla Grodd's up next. Gorilla Grodd is a 5/7. He has no effect, and normally when I look at a vanilla card in this game, I think, well, I would rather run a card with text. But the Tyranny faction has quite a few reasons to care about 5-power cards, and Gorilla Grodd's a 5-power card, and that 5-power card happens to have a pretty high defense value in 7 defense. We're going to look at another 7 defense card here, and that's Grid. Grid is a 3/7 with guard. 3 is definitely on the lower end for the silver cards, but if your opponent is playing a more aggressive strategy, they're going to have to put quite a few resources into dealing with Grid. I like Grid a lot, but he's going to come up short in kind of the mid-rangey matchups, I think. Poison Kiss is a really interesting card. I've seen some debate on whether this card is good or not. Personally, I like the card a lot. Poison Kiss reads, give an enemy leader start, lose 2. So there's going to be some strategies where we play a very passive game and we just throw Poison Ivy on the enemy and we just slowly let them dwindle down over time. That kind of passive damage that I only have to pay for once is pretty important. The only downside of this card is that you want to play it early, but you give up a pretty big tempo swing by giving up one of your silver resources to play the card early. So it definitely doesn't just plug into any deck. You need to be aware of that you're going to lose a little bit of tempo the turn you play it, and you need to be okay with that. Next up is the Tweed Brothers. Summon Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Here are Tweedledee and Tweedledum. They're Arkham Inmate Synergy cards. Each of them read at the end of turn or end, give your other Arkham inmates a stat value. In the case of Tweedledee, it's a bonus defense. In the case of Tweedledum, it's a bonus attack. Now, interestingly, they do synergize it with each other. So Tweedledum will become a 4/2 and Tweedledee will become a 2/4. And then all of your other Arkham inmates will get quote unquote +1/+1. I actually like this card a lot. I think this might be the best incentive to run both Anarchy and Tyranny in some type of Arkham inmate style deck, because the upside of this swing is so good, no? It's a threat that the opponent has to deal with. They immediately have to ignore your other stuff because they need to take out this Tweedledee Tweedledum combo, or else you're just going to get passive stats throughout the entirety of the game. +1/+1 is crazy. So yeah, I like this a lot, and it's a lot of bodies you get to put on the board. Tweedledee and Tweedledum have my vote of confidence of being pretty good cards. Up next is Friends in High Places. Seek a golden recruit from your deck and give it +3/+3. I want to say this effect is good, but it might just be a little bit too slow. I think you want to play this on turn 4 to set up for a strong turn 5. So your deck needs to look a very particular way to make this happen. But it is worth noting that if you have a low gold card count, you can essentially look for a specific recruit. If there's any crazy wombo combo decks, and we're going to go over, the first gold card we will go over is one that is potentially part of a big wombo combo. If you're going for a big wombo combo, having a card like Friends in High Places that is essentially a second copy of the card you're looking for can be very important, especially if that card is an ultimate card, which you can only run one copy of. Up next is Indoctrinate. Indoctrinate reads, summon a silver recruit from your opponent's deck in a front row space and give it guard. I mean, it's a free guard card, but it's just a random silver card. I think this card is fine. In most cases, you're probably just going to want to run your own silver card, but I definitely see a use case for this. Maybe there's a particular reason you want to have a low recruit count in your deck, and then this is a way of you getting a recruit onto your board without actually playing a recruit. And as long as you hit like a average statted card, perhaps playing Indoctrinate is better off than you playing Grid, which is like the other guard option for the Tyranny faction. Moving on to the Culling. KO all recruits with 3 attack or less. I like this a lot. It's a strong board clear. It's going to hit some silver cards, and it's definitely going to hit the vast majority of bronze cards. So yeah, we like this card a lot. Definitely expect to run this in your control Tyranny lists. Speaking of cards I like, Scarecrow. Scarecrow is an Arkham inmate. He's a 7/2, and he reads, deploy, give an enemy recruit -1/-1 for each friendly recruit with 5 or more attack. My current interpretation is that Scarecrow counts himself, though I don't have confirmation on that. The experimenting I've done and the theory crafting I've done for the 5-power deck has been really fun. I'm not sure how good it is. It feels like one of the weaker archetypes based on kind of this initial glance at the game, but it's a fun deck building puzzle, and Scarecrow is a big part of that deck building puzzle. If that package works, it's going to have to include Scarecrow because it's one of the few payoff cards, right? It's just a shame he has such a low defense value, man. Why can't it be like a 4/5 or like a 6/4 or a 5/4 even? I'll take a 5/4. Give me a 5/4. Penguin's up next, and he's also an Arkham inmate. He's a 3/3, and he reads, after an Arkham inmate KOs an enemy character on your turn, give your Arkham inmates everywhere +1/+1. I don't know how much KOing your Arkham inmates are going to be doing. I think my favorite way of building Arkham inmates is kind of like a firepower archetype or a firepower deck, one that's doing a lot of damage with actions rather than actually attacking with your units. And when you do attack with your units, I think we would prefer to be attacking the enemy leader rather than recruits. And in that case, I don't think we're proccing the Penguins effect very often, unless obviously we're building around the Penguin specifically, in which case the deck's going to look quite a bit different than what I've been imagining. So basically there's two different directions you can take Arkham inmates. You can kind of lean towards this tyranny stuff that we're going over in this video and kind of splash that in with anarchy, or you can build like mono anarchy and go all in on this kind of firepower strategy, which I think is going to be the way to do it. Perhaps maybe though there's a world where both of them can exist and they both have very different functions, and so far it looks like that's the case. The Penguin version, or this kind of anarchy version we've been talking about, fights for the board in a much different way. And because it fights for the board in a different way, it's going to be better in different matchups and worse in different matchups. Mordru is a 7/8. Very, very good stats, but he reads deploy, sacrifice a recruit with 5 or more, and create a magic spell in your hand. So every single turn, he's going to create a magic spell, assuming he's alive, of course. But in order to play him, you need to sacrifice a 5-cost card. Or sorry, not 5-cost card, a 5 attack or more card. I do believe this is conditional. It doesn't say on the card specifically, but I think all deploy effects are conditional in this game. So even though you don't have a 5-cost, or sorry, a 5 attack card in play, I don't think you'll be able to play Mordru. But his stats are so good, man. It might just be good enough to run this because his stats are so good. This is a science question, one that needs to be played around with before I can give a definitive ruling on it. But I think it's below average. Ugh. It's weird saying that a 7/8 is below average, man. This card just might be crazy, actually. But contextually, I don't see many 5 power cards that I want to sacrifice, at least not at the silver point in the game. Maybe if this card had like bigger stats and it was a gold card, I'd be higher on it. But I also might just be completely missing something about this card. It might just be the case that the way the game plays out, we're more than happy to destroy a 5 attack thing that has low health. Maybe we trade into something and then we just sacrifice that. Or maybe we only ever sacrifice something like Solomon Grundy. There's definitely ways to make this work. I'm very on the fence about this card. I'm very on the fence. Anton Arcane. There's definitely ways to build around Anton Arcane. He's a 1/1 that reads deploy. Anton Arcane gets +1/+1 for each friendly recruit KO to this game. There's a little bit of KO'd synergy that we'll talk about a bit later on. And is Anton Arcane the big payoff that you want? I'm not sure. He's kind of going in a different direction. The other KO card that I want to talk about, and we'll talk about it when we get there, more or less cares about big powerful cards that have been destroyed throughout the game, where Anton wants a large number of cards to be destroyed throughout the game rather than targeting specific KO'd effects. But maybe it's okay to run them both in the same deck. I'm not sure. But we'll talk about a bit more about this idea when we get to that other card. But I do think, in theory, Anton is quite strong, and he's obviously got a handful of synergy cards. We went over the Gotham riots yesterday when we talked about the Anarchy faction, and then in this video we talked about oh geez, what's the name of the card? Come on, I can remember. Oh my god, I can remember. I believe in myself. It's something Boom 2, but it's the one that summons all of the parademons. I'm disappointed in myself for not remembering the name of the card. Oh, I missed a bronze card. I'm sorry. I totally missed a bronze card. Let's do the bronze card now. It's Forbidden Tome. Forbidden Tome reads, your leaders lose 3 armor, create 2 magic spells in your hand. This is a strong effect, I think. I think this is a strong effect. The only issue with this is, again, it's not a seek effect, so you are just going to get a random spell, and spells have a wide range of different costs. Some of them are bronze, some of them are silver. I don't think that there's a gold spell off the top of my head, and then some of them are free. So you've got a wide range of different cost values. So if you're in a situation where it's like, oh, I need to be able to play whatever I hit off of this, and in this case, I only have a bronze resource, so I need a bronze, and then I hit one of the silver ones, it's going to be really bad for me, right? But hopefully the second card that I generate, the second magical spell I generate, is one that I can play either because it's bronze or because it's free, whatever I need in that particular scenario. Next up is Circe, another magical spell card. She reads, after you play your first silver magical spell each turn, transform the highest enemy recruit into a pig. A pig is just a 0 attack, 1 defense card with no ability. So it's a way to quote unquote silence enemy cards with strong effects. Now the effect on Circe is pretty great. Her stats are really bad though, and her effect is very conditional. You need to play a silver magical spell. There are 21 magical spells in the game, and only 4 of them, sorry, I was completely wrong about that number. It's not even close to 4, hold on. 7 of the 21 magical spells are silver, so less than half. So you need to hit one of those magical spells and then play them while Circe is in play. So you can't just splash Circe into a deck that happens to have magical spells. It kind of needs to be built around magical spells. You need to be pretty sure that you're going to get a decent number of magical spells throughout the game. That way you have a good odds of having at least 1 silver magical spell to combo with Circe. And then of course, those two cards probably need to be played on the same turn as well. So you're sacrificing your 2 actions for the turn or your 2 resources for the turn to achieve this effect. And in a lot of cases, when you're going out of your way to do that, it's probably going to be worth it, especially because once you remove that big threat from their board, it's more likely that Circe sticks around until the next turn, right? Because you've removed one of their offensive things that are there, right? So maybe Circe's really good. I think the question of Circe is more a question of, are magical spells worth running in the Anarchy faction? The answer is probably yes, but I haven't scienced it out myself yet. I haven't done any theory crafting in that regard. All right, the first gold card we're going to go over today is probably the most exciting one, and it is a Darkseid. Man, this is going to start the Galactus conversations again. Don't worry, it's not as disruptive as Galactus. This is not a Galactus card, but it's a really cool effect, man. I love this card. And I definitely want to do a lot of science with this card until I can find a good cohesive 39 card deck with Darkseid in it. Darkseid is a 7/9 and he reads, deploy, you may pay an additional silver resource. So you're spending 2 resources on this. You can't do this until turn 5, not only because you need the gold resource, but you also need the silver resource to kick it with Darkseid. But if you do pay that, you may KO an enemy recruit and destroy the space it's on. So if you destroy 4 enemy recruits with this effect, which is going to be very difficult to do because this is an ultimate card, so you can only run 1 copy of this card, and then obviously you can find ways to maybe repeat the deploy effect, or maybe you can summon this again after it gets destroyed. Whatever your method is of getting Darkseid back and repeating his effect, if you manage to repeat it 4 times, the opponent just can't play recruits. How awesome is that? Big fan of Darkseid. It's going to take a lot of work to really get that combo off, and that's not going to be his ideal scenario. You're probably pretty happy even if you just triggered this once. I like Darkseid a lot, man. I'm a huge fan of Darkseid. Darkseid might be my favorite card right now. All right, let's move on to Nick Necro, or else I'll spend all day talking about Darkseid. Nick Necro is a 4/7 with, after you play a magical spell, create a magical spell in your hand. Honestly, his stats are so low, but I'm very bad at weighting the value of magical spells. I think magical spells are really good, and I find myself doubting their power level. Every time I play a magical spell card on Tabletop Simulator, I'm surprised just how much value it gets. Maybe this is good, but it comes down so late. We're not doing this until turn 5. My current expectation is this card's not amazing. But if you are building the magical spell archetype in the Tyranny faction, it's probably worth at least trying. I don't know if it'll make the final cut, but maybe even just as a one-of in the deck, who knows. This is an interesting magical spell card, Blood Offering. After a friendly character is KO'd, reduce the cost of Blood Offering, seek a magical spell. So this just reads seek a magical spell. It's a golden card, so you get to choose one of 3 options, but this reduces its own cost when friendly characters get destroyed. I believe this has to be in your hand at the time, though we don't have clarification on that. And it would make sense that it needs to be in your hand, I think. If you can get 4 cards to be destroyed while you're holding Blood Offering, Blood Offering is going to be a free card. And in that case, it's really strong. I like Blood Offering a lot. Again, it just comes down to that question of, is the magical spell archetype worth running in Anarchy? Candle of Neron is next, and it is a very cool card. I like this card a lot. It reads, give a friendly leader +6/+6 and start, take 6 damage. There's a really cool combo you can do with this card, and it's the main use case for Candle of Neron, I think, and that's just put this thing on the Flash. The Flash has Flurry built into his leader ability, so if you give him +6/+6 and you activate his ability, he'll have 8 attack, dealing 16 damage in a single turn. Sure, he's going to take 6 damage every turn after that, but the first turn that Candle of Neron is active doesn't really matter because you just got +6 health from Candle of Neron. So Candle of Neron really only starts dealing 6 damage to you the second turn it triggers. So if you can get off 2 flurry turns with Candle of Neron, you're going crazy. Very, very high on this card. You're going to see me play a lot with this card. Appetite for Conquest reads, enemy recruits everywhere get -1/-1, and friendly recruits everywhere get +1/+1. This is a cool effect. The problem with it, of course, is that you have to wait until turn 5 to be able to play this card, so you're not going to get a ton of value out of it. In my experience so far, just through playing Tabletop Simulator, on average, a game will go from like turn 7 to turn 11. I've had games go as quick as turn 5, but that was an extraordinary scenario. So Appetite of Conquest needs to hit quite a few cards that are already in play for it to get maximum value. Maybe that's fine. Maybe it's good, actually. Wait, maybe it's good. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's good. Oh, I'm very, very divided on this card, man. It has like a huge upswing, like a huge ceiling of power, but it can also just totally whiff. And there's going to be so many scenarios where you have this card in your hand and you wish it was not this card and it was another card. It's a very cool design. I like it a lot. It would certainly be good if it was a silver card. I can confirm that. It would certainly absolutely be good if it was a silver card. The question is, does being a gold card hurt it too much? I'm going to say it does. I don't think it's good. I think it's at a perfect sweet spot. Like, this card can't be any stronger or any weaker. Shout out to the design team for this one. This is A perfect design. Next up is Necron. Necron is a 3/10, very, very defensive card. You can reasonably expect this card to live at least one turn. Necron reads Start. Summon a friendly recruit that was KO'd this game. I talked about this card a little bit earlier when we were talking about Anton Arcane. Anton Arcane rewards you for having a lot of things that died throughout the game, where Necron rewards you for having a key card that you want to revive for a specific reason. But they also kind of combo with each other, because you could bring back Anton Arcane himself, who would of course get buffed, and then when Anton Arcane dies again, you could bring him back and then he gets buffed again, and he's just through this infinite loop of buffing himself. Necron Arcane also, by the way, once he brings back a card, will trigger their deploy effects. Deploy does trigger whether or not the card was played from hand. As long as it enters play, it will trigger its deploy effect. So if you played Darkseid and you triggered its deploy effect and then he dies and the Necron brings him back, Darkseid will trigger again. Metallo is up next. I like this card a lot, man. It's a 5/4, so very low stats for a gold card, but it reads, if a friendly recruit with 5 or more attack was KO'd this turn, Metallo is free. Honestly, his impact in games that I've played on Tabletop Simulator haven't been very good. Like, he hasn't gone crazy. But the theory is, like, he should be pretty good. No, he's just a free 5/4. Obviously, when you're in situations where you don't activate his effect, he's going to feel really bad, right? You don't want to play a gold 5/4. But man, the upside should be so huge. Yeah, I want to experiment a lot more with Metallo. Very fun design. It's just a matter of finding that correct 5 attack power list. Next up, we've got Sinestro. Sinestro is a 6/3 and who reads, deploy, give each enemy recruit -2/-2. This is an AoE effect that hits enemy recruits for -2/-2. That's pretty good. Plus, he's triggering the 5 attack barrier for, the cards that care about having 5 attack. He can re-trigger again when he's summoned from Necron, but we're starting to talk about very slow strategies, right? Necron is a gold card, Sinestro is a gold card, which means for it to even be possible for Necron to re-summon Sinestro, Sinestro would need to be played on turn 5, Necron would need to be played on 6, Sinestro would need to die during that turn, and then Necron would bring back Sinestro on turn 7. And that's the soonest possible way you can do that without any external ramp effects or anything weird like that. Turn 7's pretty late in the game, so in order to come back and actually win that game, especially against aggressive matchups, you're going to need a strong board state, or at least be stable enough that the opponent can't just close out the game with some type of speed effect or some type of damaging thing. Ra's al-Ghul has Hidden. He's a 5/4, and he reads, after another friendly recruit is KO'd while Ra's al-Ghul is hidden, return that recruit to your hand. So Hidden does remove itself at the start of your next turn, so a card can only have Hidden for 1 turn cycle. So you could play Ra's al-Ghul and then sacrifice your cards by punching into the enemy or using a Lex Luthor effect or something like that to have that card return to your hand. Perhaps this is another Darkseid combo. Or you can just play Ra's al-Ghul and leave up a couple strong guard units in play that the opponent more or less can't kill, because if they do kill it, it's just returning to your hand anyway. Perhaps in the future there'll be ways to give Ra's al-Ghul Hidden again, but even in the worst case scenario, which is that there is no additional hidden synergy for Ra's al-Ghul, which so far I don't see any, I think he's still a fine card. Problem is his stats are pretty low, and you have to ultimately pay for the cards that he brings back anyway. I do wonder if the cards Ra's al-Ghul brings back are still considered being KO'd. For example, let's say I have Darkseid in play, Darkseid dies, and Ra's al-Ghul returns me to his hand. Can Necron also bring back that Darkseid? Or is the copy of Darkseid that would be KO'd returned to my hand, and therefore Darkseid was never actually KO'd? Or he's not part of like the KO'd pile? That's science for another day. Lex Luthor is a 2/10 who has Lex Luthor has +2 for each Tyranny card in your hand. Plus he has end if Lex Luthor didn't attack this turn, draw a card. So Lex Luthor is one of those cards similar to Harley Quinn we talked about yesterday, who rewards you for building a mono deck. Lex Luthor wants you to have a full deck of Tyranny cards. That way he has the most number of stats possible, instead of just, relying on drawing your Tyranny half of your deck. If you just build a 40 card Tyranny deck, every single card in your hand is going to be buffing Lex Luthor. I will say the end effect of Lex Luthor is kind of weird. If Lex Luthor didn't attack this turn, draw a card, how often are you going to actually want to trigger that? I mean, don't get me wrong, draw a card's fantastic, but Lex Luthor's whole thing is, I've got a bunch of attack. What's the point of that attack if I'm just not going to use it because I want to draw a card? On the other hand of that, though, you could easily say, well, in some situations, you're not going to have any cards in your hand. Lex Luthor's going to draw you cards and therefore buff himself passively. So every turn you choose not to attack with Lex Luthor, not only are you drawing a card to play, but you're also quote-unquote buffing him. That's the argument for the other side. Personally, I don't love that argument because the card you draw, you're going to want to play it, so you're losing out on that attack value anyway. So you might trap yourself into thinking you're getting this value by not attacking with Lex Luthor, but in reality, you're just stuck in an infinite loop where you're never going to attack with Lex Luthor. To be fair, though, the interaction is a little bit more complicated than that because the draw card is happening at the end of your turn. Lex Luthor will be stronger during the opponent's turn, so he acts as a stronger blocker during the opponent's turn if I choose not to attack than he otherwise would be. So again, it's not as straightforward as I just put it, but I would certainly describe the effect as unintuitive. Like, it's not immediately obvious what you should do with Lex Luthor while he's in play. Mr. Mind is a 3/3 with Hidden, who reads, after an opponent draws an action, Mr. Mind gets +3/+3, and then deploy, each player draws 2 cards. This is an interesting effect, right? Let's say high rolls, the opponent draws 2 actions. Well, now you have a 9/9. Is that really worth it? Oh, it's also got Hidden. Oh, that's interesting. Because what I was going to say is, aren't they likely, if they're going to draw actions, if they do hit the cards that we want them to hit, they're more likely to have a removal tool to get rid of Mr. Mind. But if Mr. Mind has Hidden, he's protected from those removal tools. Is that enough to make Mr. Mind good? I'm going to lean towards no. Of all the crazy golden cards we've already gone over for the Tyranny faction, we're not even done with the amount of crazy golden recruits we have for this faction. So I'm going to say Mr. Mind is on the lower end of that spectrum. On the higher end of that spectrum, let's talk about Poison Ivy, who has one of the coolest designs I've seen in the game so far. She has Lethal. She's a 1/7, but the 1 doesn't really matter, right? Because she has Lethal. But on top of that, she has a very unique effect. She reads, after Poison Ivy damages a leader she's attacking, KO them. She's an ultimate card, so you can only run 1 copy of this, but she's an instant one-shot to enemy leaders. What a cool effect, man. This is such a cool card. But because you can only put 1 copy of this card in your deck, you can't exactly build your entire strategy around it, right? Probably just belongs in like a control-ish archetype, and you're probably just going to use it as a 1/7 with Lethal most of the time, and you're going to be really happy when you get away with using its, its instant KO effect against leaders. It's not going to be your primary objective, I think. It's probably too greedy to try and force that value out of Poison Ivy. Instead, you're probably just going to want to use her as that standard 1/7, which is still a great card, by the way. I don't know about great, but it's still, like, good. Malcolm Merlin. Man, this is an interesting card. Malcolm Merlin has Ambush, and he reads, your actions deal lethal damage. He's a 4/3, so that's very low stats for a golden card. Some of the lowest we've seen, but actions are lethal. This combos really well with a lot of the tactics cards between the trick arrows that Green Arrow can generate, but also combos well with Batarangs, which is one of the gadgets in the tactics faction, but it also combos well with the energy faction. You can go look at our energy video where we talked about the lightning bolts. Those are actions. They all read deal 2 damage and draw a card. With Malcolm in play, they read deal infinite damage and draw a card. I mean, against recruits, of course. Lethal does not work on leaders, with the exception, of course, Poison Ivy. Yeah, lots of interesting synergy for Malcolm Merlin. You'll definitely see me trying out a lot of Malcolm Merlin stuff in the future. Let's go to Brainiac next. I'm pretty high on Brainiac, man. I like him a lot. He's a 5/5, so honestly, pretty average stats for a gold card, if not below average. In fact, I would say below average. But his effect is really cool. It reads end, draw a card, so he's guaranteed to at least draw 1 card. But he also has Parting Shot, draw a card. So when you play Brainiac, you know this card is going to draw me 2 cards at the very least. And the longer he lives, he's going to draw you more and more cards. I like this card a lot. There's a lot of potential synergy. 1, he's a 5 attack card, so he combos into the 5 attack kind of archetype. He combos in potential cyborg decks, which is a tactics card. We'll probably go over tactics tomorrow because I like tactics a lot. Yeah, lots of potential avenues for Brainiac. He also just might be good in control decks that want to play a lot of golden cards. Our last 2 cards for the Tyranny faction are both going to be action cards, starting off with Omega Beam. Omega Beams is KO an enemy recruit. That's already just a good effect right there. Plus, it draws you a card. So this is a hard removal tool. Just says, boom, get that card out of here. Plus, I'm going to draw a card. On top of that really powerful removal tool, we have another one, which is Massacre. Now, Massacre is an ultimate card, so you can only run 1 copy of this, but it reads KO all recruits. This is going to be good for control archetypes. If you need the game to go longer, you need to stall out the game as long as possible. Massacre is going to help you do that by clearing the enemy board, and then hopefully it's not going to kill too many of your things because you're in a position where you're trying to stall out the game, so you probably won't have many recruits. You're probably trying to play a lot of big, powerful golden recruits or something like that. All right, we went over every Tyranny card. Man, that took longer than I expected. I expected this to be one of the shorter ones, and maybe it does end up being one of the shorter ones once it's all edited down. Usually these take me about an hour to record, and then then they're a 40-minute full video when they're all said and done, because there's like gaps in between me talking about the individual cards and then, you know, some retakes whenever I make a mistake talking about a card or something like that. But yeah, that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. Keep being awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.